It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Nico Hines, London editor of The Daily Beast, joins us from the UK capital. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
We're pleased to welcome as well Reem Mumtaz, France correspondent for Politico.
Hello.
Quiet week?
Yeah, so quiet. No, it's not.
Right.
It never is.
All right. Leila Jacinto has been kicking off her shoes this week, right? Senior editor at France24.com.
Oh, yes, throwing them around.
All right, more like throwing them around. Okay. Craig Kapitas, contributing editor for Quartz, is with us as well. How are you, sir?
Fine. Bonsoir, mon capitaine.
All right, The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter. Hashtag World This Week. Let's start with a spoiler alert on the next season of Brexit. They've decided to kill off one of the long-running series' most popular characters.
Throughout my time as Speaker, I have sought to increase the relative authority of this legislature, for which I will make absolutely no apology to anyone, anywhere, at any time.
So there you have it, Reem Mumtaz. You have John Bercow going out after 10 years in the chair with another one of his trademark neckties there. And there was a lot of tension because, let's face it, the UK came close to what you could call a constitutional crisis over the past few months. And he played a bigger role than most when it comes to being Speaker of the Commons.
No, he definitely did. And he certainly wasn't shy in sort of, whipping the parliament into order, however he sort of perceived order to be. And he was clearly, at odds with...
How much has he gotten a cult following with the French, for instance?
I think he has a huge following here, because he's a Remainer. The French are... definitely not for Brexit, but also, he has not just great ties, but he has great, expressions. When he says in the middle of the Commons, "I don't give a flying flamingo," you got to hand it to the guy,
Nico Hines, would you say he's changed the course of history?
Certainly he has. He's an interesting character because back in the mists of time in sort of 2013 or so, he actually helped the backbenchers then, except that time it was to promote the idea of Brexit. So he's always promoted the ideas of the kind of minor players in Parliament as opposed to the government. And of course, what's happened in recent years is that we've got weak governments trying to force through a Brexit that most of Parliament doesn't like. And so almost by coincidence, it just so happened that you had a Speaker in charge who was willing to give Parliament power against the government. And, as a result, we're still in the EU, and who knows how much longer we might still be.
Yeah, it's you're not out until you're out. And with Labour agreeing this week, Boris Johnson finally does have his snap general election. But before we ponder the imponderables of holding a vote during the heart of the Christmas shopping season, let's not overlook Halloween. In London on Thursday evening, costumed impersonators reveled in reminding us that October the 31st, until the start of this very week, was the Brexit deadline.
We haven't got it done, have we? That's why I've been lying in a ditch. I've been having to lie in a ditch the last half an hour because, bet's a bet. I said I'd rather die in a ditch, but I just didn't die. So, here I am. It's not my fault. It's, it's everybody else's.
My God.
Craig Kapitas?
Well, the great thing about Bercow, he evidences three important things that the current crop of Johnson, Corbyn, and that waterwit Farage do not evidence, which is character, integrity, and moral purpose. Whether you agree with how he expresses those three essential components of leadership is another question. But he's the only one who's doing that, and I would suggest that the best the voters in the UK can do. Remember, the UK is one of the cradles of Western democracy, is offer up Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn. We got more problems than we think.
Yeah, but the point is that the country's divided over Brexit, and they're going to settle it not with a second referendum, but with a general election.
Well, that's fine, and you've gotten right to the point of it, because at the end of the day, who gave us these people? It was the electorate. It was the voters, whether it's Brexit or Trump or anywhere. And why do they do that? Well, that's a separate discussion. But I can tell you, many moons ago, I edited an article on this with the writer James Baldwin, who I assigned to do this story when I was at Esquire magazine. And what he said the problem was education. He said people were not educated. Now, if you want to be branded politically correct in this day and age, go on TV and say the electorate of the UK is bone stupid. I can see the emails coming right now. But the fact is that they are not educated. They have been bamboozled. They have been hornswoggled.
You're saying they're bamboozled, but let me put this to Nico Hines. What you have is it's an election that's not really about economics and differences of what used to be the left-right divide, but instead cultural differences, identity differences.
Well, that's the theory. People thought exactly the same thing back in 2017. I'm sure you remember Theresa May called an election to make sure that the government was strong enough to put through Brexit, to put down the saboteurs and the traitors who were trying to delay it, and thinking that she would get a huge majority because she was way ahead in the polls before the election. And 2 years later, we're having the exact same election on the exact same terms. And what happened when you actually drill down into why Theresa May didn't win a majority back in 2017 is that when you asked voters who voted for Brexit, especially those in the Midlands and in the North, so, you know, the kind of what you would imagine as the poorer communities, ultimately, when it came to voting, yes, they thought that we should leave because people had voted to leave, but they thought it was much more important that the economy was strong, that the National Health Service was kept strong, that their taxes would be well looked after. So yes, people in some areas voted Brexit because essentially they thought they had nothing to lose. Let's tell the elite that we've had enough of the status quo. But when it came down to a decision that they thought would really affect them in their day-to-day lives, they went back to the old things they've always voted on.
Back to the old things, and that is a cautionary tale. The latest polls give the Conservatives a healthy jump on Labour. But as Nico was just saying, the electorate's never been more fickle, it seems. As Theresa May found out last time, a lot can happen over the next 5 weeks. That is Politico's poll of polls, by the way, Rim Mumtaz, that we're looking at. But let me ask you, Leila, the fact that people, we're talking about this scrambling of what are the political fault lines, what does that tell you?
Well, I think Nico is right. And if you see Jeremy Corbyn's platform, he seems to be emphasizing bread and butter issues, the National Health Service, education, and probably even the Conservatives will try and address these bread and butter issues, which leaves the elephant in the room unaddressed. And because voters are absolutely
Brexit.
Yes, absolutely Brexit, because it is true that the British public is completely fed up with it, and I kind of agree with you about we're seeing this wave of what populism brings out in the democratic process, but what we are seeing since 2016 is basically, like it or not, it was a fait accompli. Brexit. The referendum happened, whether you liked it or not. And for the people who did vote for Brexit, they are really seeing exactly what they're thinking about, that the elites are obfuscating and not giving them what they voted for. And so then this strange sort of elitism comes on where everybody starts blaming, these conservative politicians like Boris Johnson and then say, because they can't quite be so politically incorrect and say, well, it was the rural people who don't know what's good for them who voted for it. So then, they blame. But the fact is, they've had this referendum. We've had innumerable delays. And they're going into an election. And they're probably not going to be discussing Brexit that much. For political campaign reasons.
I mean, that is just going to be a disaster if this election doesn't actually produce a clear-cut answer from the polity and the people on Brexit, because that is the point. Like, this is the deadlock breaking mechanism that they came up with.
It's the only issue you're saying.
It should be
the overriding
issue.
one.
It should be the overriding issue. And if it doesn't end up being a clear vote on Brexit, even though this is not a referendum on the withdrawal agreement, then I fear that we are going to be in the same position we've been in for the past 7-8 months with these interminable extension requests. The problem is going to be that Europe is going to be much less inclined to granting more extensions. I know the French want this last extension to be the last one. Absolutely. Now, when it comes I'd like to sort of go back to this issue of education or lack of education. I think it's really dangerous to sort of go down that path. I think perhaps our reference points are still the reference points from like the 20th century, when we were sort of in the post-Cold War era, and it was an ideological world, and we had these sort of reference points. Today, we've clearly moved past that ideological world, and now we're back to discussing things in different terms. And I think we should be open to listening to, and that is what democracy is, we should be open to listening to what people want to discuss. And it seems like identity, migration are the main things that people want to discuss. It doesn't make them less educated.
And
I agree. Yep.
The disruption seems to cross borders. We saw on Thursday a rousing endorsement for Boris Johnson from none other than Donald Trump, a phone-in guest to Brexit Party leader Nigel Farage's regular call-in show on LBC Radio.
I think he's the exact right guy for the times, and I know that you and him will end up doing something that could be terrific. If you and he get together, it's unstoppable force. And Corbyn would be so bad for your country. He'd be so bad. He'd take you in such a bad way. He'd take you into such bad places.
Nico Hines, will that phone interview matter ultimately to voters?
I don't think that interview in itself matters, but I think there is a crucial thing at play here. And today actually has been a hugely significant day in London. Just behind me, on the other side of the river there, Nigel Farage held an event today where he issued an ultimatum to Boris Johnson, basically saying, ditch the deal that you spent all this time negotiating with Europe and run on a hard Brexit platform, and I will do a deal with you. We can win together. If you choose not to accept my offer, then I'm going to run against you in 500 seats in Britain, and he's going to put a huge amount of pressure on the Conservatives, which could well cost the Conservatives for getting a victory. So Nigel Farage is threatening at the moment to basically stop Brexit going through by January. And sorry, Macron, but we're going to be coming back, if this goes ahead, we're going to be coming back in January and saying, oh, we've either got a hung parliament and perhaps we'd like to have a second referendum now. So Boris Johnson somehow, in the next 2 weeks, got to convince Nigel Farage not to run against him and allow Boris Johnson to get this pro-Brexit majority.
If it happens the way you're describing it, then the Conservatives don't have an outright majority. We know Labour won't have an outright majority. At that point, does Jeremy Corbyn turn to the Lib Dems? Does he turn to the Scottish National Party? What kind of a coalition could govern?
It's hard to know if there'd be an actual solid coalition that would be built. But what we would know for sure, that Boris Johnson has to get an outright majority himself, because he's basically got no friends in Parliament. The only friends that the Conservatives had previously were the DUP, the Northern Irish Party, who were also pro-Brexit. They're disgusted by the deal he did with Europe, which they consider to have sold them out. So that means basically everybody else in Parliament is either soft Brexit or anti-Brexit. So if Boris Johnson doesn't get a full majority himself, so he needs over half of the seats just for the Conservative Party, then he's in massive trouble. There's no way he'll be able to cobble together a coalition or any sort of deal. If he falls short of that, which, as I say, would be likely if Nigel Farage's Brexit Party do well, if he falls short of that, then basically everybody else agrees that we shouldn't rush out on a hard Brexit, and that perhaps there should be a second referendum. So you'd have the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats, the Scottish nationalists, the Welsh nationalists, there's a Green Party MP. All of these people would come together, and it would be hard to build a sustainable long-term government. But what they would almost certainly be able to do in the short term is say, right, let's have a second referendum.
Mumtaz?
Well, you know what? The past 7 months, 8 months, we've just been seeing what a complete mess the British political system has become. And the reality is the EU has time and time and time again, 3 times now, actually bailed out the British politicians for their ineptitude to deliver what their own people have asked them to deliver. And at the same time, you have British politicians who have the gall of coming out and accusing the EU of, playing hardball or not, or sort of being, a contrarian. The reality is the EU has given extensions to the UK 3 times. The UK hasn't been able to deliver Brexit. Asking it for a 4th extension is just galling.
Craig Capitas, your thoughts on that phone call between Nigel Farage and Donald Trump? Is there
It's another episode in the daytime drama of Donald Trump and nothing more. That is what has become. It has turned into. And look, I got to go back. You made a very important point about 20th century thinking perhaps should not be applied to what we're seeing now. I think you're absolutely wrong on that, because you're talking about hot button issues like immigration. Well, if the public is not educated on those in civics classes by, really good debate, then you're going to allow these clown shop guys like Farage and Johnson and Corbyn and Trump to come in and suck up all the oxygen. The people of Great Britain has been proven, I believe, in every article and study I've read, were sold a pig in a poke about Brexit. They were lied to. And they bought it, in my opinion, because they were not educated.
Well, no, I mean, you can hardly call people like Boris Johnson, etc., uneducated.
I'm not calling Johnson. I'm calling the unwashed masses.
I think the problem is not so much
the narod.
that the people are uneducated. It's probably the problem with the education system.
It's very problematic to call them unwashed masses.
They have been told that they are Great Britain. They have ceased being great since the Second World War. Their education system teaches them very little, that they are indeed not a fantastic island nation. They are a small, little, isolated island nation. So I don't think it's a matter of people who are educated.
Get you in trouble.
It's the national myth that the educated and the uneducated are just as susceptible to.
All right, we got much more to talk about. And when we come back, stay with us. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Daily Beast London Bureau Chief Nico Hines is with us. Welcome back. Welcome back as well to Reem Momtaz, France correspondent at Politico. Senior editor at France24.com, Lila Jacinto is with us, as is Craig Capitas, contributing editor at Quartz. In the United States, it's on to the next phase of impeachment hearings against Donald Trump.
On this vote, the yeas are 232, the nays are 196. The resolution is adopted without objection. The motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
Party lines, all the Republicans voting against moving to the next phase. Democrats still hope to have the entire procedure done before primary season starts. That's next January for the 2020 U.S. elections. Republicans showing remarkable discipline, falling in line behind the president's claim of a witch hunt that's politically motivated.
This is a process that has been fundamentally tainted. The president has had no rights inside these hearings. His counsel has not been able to be present. The resolution says that they're going to continue doing what they want to do. It gives authority for open hearings, but they cannot go back and fix what is a fundamentally tainted and unfair record.
Craig Capitas, what do you think of the story being spun there?
Well, the story is that there's no longer a Republican Party. The Republicans have made the bet that Trumpism is going to outlive Trump. And the fact that that's going on has already poisoned America's relations with its friends and allies abroad. And from my own discussions with foreign leaders, the one question that continues to bumfuzzle people is why a substantial number of American politicians go along with this. And there's a reason. It goes back to 1963 when Adam Clayton Powell, the black representative from Harlem, said the primary and overriding duty and responsibility of each member of the House and Senate is to get reelected and get back on the payroll. And that remains true today, and it's proven because Trump commands the Republican Party payroll.
So he's got the money.
He's not only does he have the money, he's going to he has total control of this unitary procedure. The second thing, why did all these people go for him? Well, it's not because they like him. It's because he has ensured that the Supreme Court is going to remain stacked with ultra-conservatives. He ensures the continued deregulation of various industries, and he wants to continue lowering corporate taxes. That's why Wall Street and the Bible smackers are behind him. It's for financial reasons.
And so they're all falling in line. We'll see how these hearings, of course, play out and how they play out in the court of public opinion. Donald Trump, who's made headlines throughout the week, beginning with that big announcement from the White House.
Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is dead. He was the founder and leader of ISIS, the most ruthless and violent terror organization anywhere in the world.
Leila Jacinto, of course, everyone has been comparing it with the killing of Osama bin Laden under the previous administration.
Yes, I mean, there's the famous mashup video, but you know what? This is just the announcement. I think with the Baghdadi, and this is a big story because, he was the most wanted man since, one of the world's most wanted men since 2014. But, there are some very important things that, this raid held up. Baghdadi was in Idlib province. And for the past few months, we've been hearing about Idlib as the last refuge of the Syrian opposition against Bashar al-Assad. There's Turkey on the border. Turkey is supposed to be the protector of Idlib. Under the Astana process, Turkey asked for this buffer zone. And we're not talking about the Kurdish areas here. We're talking about the Idlib area.
This is northwest Syria.
Yes, this man was found around 3 miles away from the Turkish border. And under the Astana process, Turkey was given this buffer zone in exchange for making sure that they would manage the jihadist groups. Now, the fact that the ISIS leader or the IS group or the Daesh group leader is in getting some sort of protection with another jihadist group that is not exactly their friends. They are mortal enemies. I mean, it comes to the basic issue that we should have learned since the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, which is these jihadist groups are extremely fluid and they make all sorts of, alliances that are very rarely based on, any ideology.
And so now you've had, of course, the ISIS confirming the death, naming a new leader that nobody's ever heard of, by the way.
I mean, that is a generic nom de guerre to beat all generic nom de guerres.
Right.
Mr. Qureshi from the tribe of the prophets. We don't know who he is.
Right. Does it matter who that person is?
Actually, I think it does because Baghdadi, he did have in the realm of this jihadist scholarship, he did have some sort of Islamic credentials. So, and it will be hard to get these kind of major figures into leadership. But ISIS and Daesh has proven that they've just marketed this brand into a global phenomenon. It doesn't matter.
I think it's important to clarify a few things. Baghdadi was different than bin Laden in the sense that he was still an actual commander of an operational commander in that sense of his organization. When bin Laden was taken out, he was no longer really running the day-to-day of his organization. Baghdadi being in Idlib is an extremely complicated situation, and we don't know all of the details of how he got there, what he was doing there. Anyone who claims that today, 5 days later, they know why he was in Idlib is lying, basically, and exaggerating.
Right, but the fact is he was in Idlib.
And
they got him in Idlib.
It is super important to also not be dragged into feeding into Bashar al-Assad's and Putin's propaganda on Idlib. They have been calling Idlib for the past 4 or 5 years a jihadist sort of mainland, when there are about 3 million internally displaced Syrians, who, by the way, were displaced because of Assad's brutal war against them, not because of ISIS or others. And I think it's important not to give credence to that. What Baghdadi was doing there, we will have to figure out. And as you said, the relationships between these jihadist groups are fluid, which is why I think we should be cautious today in sort of ascribing anything
But
to
when
it.
there are jihadist groups, for instance, in Pakistan, you expect the Pakistani authorities to manage this. And when you give the
As they did with
international...
Bin Laden and Abbottabad?
No, and they didn't, right? And that's why they fail, and that's why this relationship is fraught between the U.S. and Pakistan. When you negotiate and say that if Turkey says that, I'm going to make sure, and not to deny that there are a lot of civilians in Idlib, but not to deny that this is what has happened to the opposition, and that Erdogan from the start has been using these groups as he is right now. The spectrum of Islamist groups, sure, but they are now being used in the Rojava, in those areas. So, when you give a commitment about we're going to manage these jihadist groups that are on the terror lists, that's Turkey's responsibility.
Yeah, and there's also the ISIS prisoners that are still being held in northeast Syria. Nico Hines, it's all gone so fast the past couple of weeks, from that phone call between Donald Trump and Recep Tayyip Erdogan to the killing of Baghdadi and the beginning of those joint Russia-Turkey patrols in northeast Syria this Friday.
Yeah, it's very dangerous times. I think the fact that nobody knows who this al-Quraishi is an additional element of danger, because the one thing we know in history is when you come into a position of power and you're an unknown quantity, it's almost beholden on you to prove that you're tough enough to do it, to prove that you're up to the task. And, a lot of what ISIS has done in the last few years has basically been a propaganda exercise. These well-produced videos, people being executed in barbaric ways in orange jumpsuits, all of that stuff is all about presentation and about projecting a brand which has caught on around the world. And Baghdadi was so important to that. If you look at all of the videos made by the people who were inspired by ISIS, who weren't necessarily directed by them, some of them were just inspired by having watched ISIS on the television or online. And they all made these suicide videos which they pledged allegiance to Baghdadi, not to ISIS. And so Quraishi has now got a small window where he's going to have to try and prove that he is the rightful heir to this. And I'd say that was very worrying.
All right, another story we've been following for you is after 2 weeks of unprecedented street protests against the system in Lebanon. Some good news and some bad news, you might say, for customers as banks reopened this Friday. Well, they sort of reopened.
I came today to withdraw an amount, which of course they didn't let me withdraw. I need it for the company. I need a certain amount in cash. They told me that there are some limitations on withdrawing. It's okay. I understand.
Wow, we're in our third week, Reem Mumtaz, of unprecedented street protests against the system, this power-sharing agreement that's existed, you might say, since the days where the French were there. People, well, they're beginning to feel the pinch, aren't they?
Are they really beginning now to feel the pinch? The reason why we're seeing these historic protests in the streets of Lebanon is because the Lebanese people have been suffering economically. The past year has been extremely difficult on them. And what spurred them on really is sort of this new set of, what they call austerity measures by a political class that is wholesale corrupt, that has been corrupt for decades, since they've all been the same people in power, like literally the same people in power for the past 29 years. And so the Lebanese today, when you tell them, the situation has gotten worse because you've been protesting for your rights for 2 weeks, and you're responsible for the coming economic collapse, I mean, that is just wholesale rejected by the people of Lebanon, because they're not fools. They know that the reason why economically the situation is so structurally unsound in Lebanon is because of the mismanagement and the endemic mismanagement by this political class over the past 2 or 3 decades.
Right, Kapitas?
Well, it's been this way in Lebanon since 1958. Being Lebanese, you well know that. There is nothing new here. It got worse on April 13th, 1975, when the first of many civil wars
No, there is something new
started.
here. I
What
will
is
interrupt you. What is new is these absolutely non-sectarian protests. You have between 1.5 and 2 million Lebanese. We've never seen this before. Taking to the streets.
Where's the
not
Lebanese?
to-
Where's the Lebanese Nelson Mandela?
Let me just finish. We don't need a Nelson Mandela. But
You don't?
the reality is, yes.
Maybe you need an Asterix.
Well, let me just finish. The reality is you have 1.5 million to 2 million people who've taken to the streets in Lebanon not to support a leader, a Zaim, not to support a sect, but to talk in one voice as Lebanese people. That is unprecedented in the history of Lebanon, and that should not be seen through neo-colonial, colonial,
Who's going to
Western
coalesce that?
views.
Who in Lebanon right now can coalesce that?
Actually,
Who is your
there are
George
multiple-
Marshall?
There are multiple people. You wouldn't know them.
Jumblots?
No, you wouldn't know them because.
Well, I want to know. Tell us who they are.
Unfortunately, too
I
many
want
of
to
the
know
people,
who the George
too many
Marshall of
people
Lebanon
who
is.
cover Lebanon.
I want to
mainly
know.
cover it from the top down.
Lebanon has the
time.
third highest. Lebanon has the third highest indebtedness of any country in the world on ratio of debt to GDP.
Yeah, thanks to who?
And it needs a leadership
Yeah, thanks to who?
to fix this now. And
Do you wanna hear what the
when I
leadership
first
is?
went there to cover the Civil War, I kept looking to find the leader. Who's in charge here? Who's going to make this
I don't
place
think
better?
you're interested in actually hearing the answer to your
No,
question.
I want
It doesn't
to
seem
know.
like it.
I'm asking a
One at a
question.
time.
I want to know who is the George Marshall or Nelson Mandela, who is the leader of this movement who can take Lebanon out of this mire it's been in since
Does it,
1958.
maybe not a Nelson Mandela, but Reem Mumtaz, does Lebanon need a Václav Havel, let's say?
Listen, what Lebanon needs is, right now, what the people in the street are asking for is what they call an independent or technocratic transitional government in order to be able to organize elections. That is what the democratic process in the constitution says. That is what people want. Are there people who can actually be the technocratic prime minister and 15, 16, 18 technocratic ministers? Yes, they exist. They're not people who foreign correspondents know, because foreign correspondents don't deal with that kind of sort of grassroots level in Lebanon.
The foreign correspondents that are doing wrong, they should be there asking who these people are. When I asked back in the 70s, they said, go see Wally Jumblatt. As long as you saw him after lunch, he'd tell you anything you wanted to hear because he drank so much.
Well,
so you went to see him before lunch. Who's the boss?
Now you get their sons. But last year I was covering the Lebanese election, and I mean, just it's. I mean,
And it is musical chairs.
It is musical chairs. To give the street and the Lebanese people their due. This was an extraordinary mobilization, and we're seeing it in cities like Tripoli. Sunni majority cities, we're seeing demonstrations in the south. However, right now, it's the game. The central question is what's going to happen now. I mean, Hariri took 9 months to come up with his government, and I think the cabinet fell less than 9 months. The idea now is, in the transition process, will these political players actually allow a technocratic government to be formed? And can people sort of agree on these technocratic experts? There is no doubt that Lebanon has the expertise for it. But the question is, are these powers going to give up?
Will the likes of Hezbollah,
So currently, that is what you have two levels of conversation happening at the same time. They're kind of parallel conversations. You have that conversation between the traditional stakeholders, Hezbollah, Hariri, Aoun, Jumblatt, Jaja. They're discussing among themselves how can they get out of this sort of unprecedented situation they've been put into
Keep the status
by
quo.
the people. keep they understand they can't continue with the status quo. They're trying to salvage as much as possible with their own sort of,
Hasn't that always been the
meetings.
dynamic,
But
though?
on the other hand, you have the protest movement that is saying, actually, that is no longer going to be enough. Where this goes, we don't know. But what I've been hearing from the protesters on the streets is that it cannot get worse than what they've known for the past 30 years. The mismanagement can't get worse. The economic corruption cannot get worse. The lack of basic services cannot get worse. So they're not afraid of what's coming next.
I think just one thing that you need to mention is Iran. So, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, because of the outside players do have an influence. Iran.
But it's not just Iran. It's France. It's the U.S.
It's the West. It's everybody. We're going to graduate to perhaps even a more controversial subject for many here. The vote wasn't even close. The New York City Council heeding the call of animal rights activists and approving by a 42-6 margin the banning of French foie gras starting in 2022. Those guilty of serving force-fed goose liver face fines that range from $500 to $2,000, much to the chagrin of the chef at M. Wells Steakhouse in Queens.
All animal breeding is inhumane to begin with. Why focus on a small operation like this one? It's just because it has this image associated with wealth and extravagance.
Okay, Nico Hines, careful of what you're about to say. What's your religion when it comes to foie gras?
I mean, I'm not an expert in the production of foie gras, but it does strike me that there must be a way to make it that's a bit more humane, perhaps.
No.
However, it does strike me as a bizarre priority for the government in New York. You know, it's a great city, but it's crawling with rats. It's a kind of segregated city, culturally, racially. It's, half the people there can't afford healthcare. And, this isn't like one of those measures where they try to bring in a soda tax or limit the size of your soda cup, which had healthcare outcomes, which I could understand why that would be a priority. This seems kind of frivolous and stupid.
It's the middle of duck hunting season in New York right now. That's one of the ironies of this whole thing. 6,000 licensed.
Can you have more humane foie gras, though? That's the question.
No, foie gras has been around since Greco-Roman times, and the process has never really changed.
Yeah, and I wasn't it Chicago that tried to ban this? And
San Francisco.
No, California it is, but
Did Chicago try it too?
Chicago repelled it because the mayor called it one of the most stupid initiatives.
Rim Mumtaz?
I kind of agree with Nico here. I think New York City should, first of all, fix the MTA, the disastrous subway system, and then maybe start thinking about, the health of the geese or goose, however you say it, and foie gras.
We can start a good smuggling business here, though, Picard. We get some good French stuff, underground railroaded into New York City.
But there is a broader question, and I think that chef poses an important question, which is, what about veal? What about all the other animals that are...
Take your pick.
Maybe we've taken this humane thing a bit too far. I mean,
it's a friggin' duck.
Honestly, it's...
it's not even Bugs Bunny.
Nico Hines, I know, final point on this. This is an issue that's coming up more and more. Even here in Paris, we're now seeing vegan and vegetarian restaurants more and more.
Yeah, well, veganism is absolutely huge in London at the moment. Restaurants opening up all over the place with really complicated ways to make things that don't quite taste as good as pizza. Yeah. But, I think there is a lot to be said for it. If people are willing to take a kind of hit on their taste buds, and they're doing something good for society and they feel as though they are, good for them.
Yes, but
I'd stick with the real pizza and the foie gras myself.
All right, Nico Hines, who's clearly come on down with a position on that one. Nico, I want to thank you for joining us. I want to thank Rim Mumtaz, Craig Kapitas, Leela Jacinto. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Emma James. You missed the Halloween jokes earlier.
Oh, yes, indeed. I know, Halloween goes on longer and longer every year. It feels like it's been about a month of Halloween being celebrated.
It's past now. But it is a national holiday here in France today. It's
It
All
is
Saints
indeed.
Day.
Yes, or Toussaint, as they call it over here in France. And a lot of people wondering really whether it's being celebrated in quite the same religious way as it once used to be. And it's interesting that it does seem to have become amalgamated with All Souls Day, or Day of the Dead, which is November the 2nd, because a lot of people, rather than talking about marking or celebrating the dead saints, they're actually talking about their dead relatives. And Living France magazine among them saying, loved ones who are no longer with us will be remembered in France today as families visit cemeteries and place chrysanthemums on their graves, which isn't. That's supposed to be what's happening tomorrow. But anyway.
No, in France, it's on November 1st. They go with the chrysanthemums.
Oh, I'm very confused because it's All Souls Day tomorrow.
No, I don't.
No, All Souls today, All Saints was yesterday.
No, All Saints today, All Saints the 1st, All Souls the 2nd. See, none of us know.
Sounds like a Rolling Stones song.
Anyway, I wish I hadn't brought this up. Clearly, some people are doing the traditional today. This is a photograph, I'm not sure where from, they didn't stipulate.
Okay.
But clearly lots of flowers been delivered to that particular cemetery. This wine expert shared a cartoon which is an alternative homage to leaving flowers on the grave, a bit of drop of wine or two. Not sure who the cartoonist is there, I'm afraid. But clearly, as society changes, lots of things change about these national holidays. This gentleman saying that, certainly he's an older chap, but he's not at all happy to see so many shops open on what is a national holiday. He clearly hasn't been to the UK recently. No holidays tend to be recognised there at all anymore. But what he says is it's a total lack of respect because this is supposed to be a day of remembering those who have died. Interestingly, though, according to a recent survey, young people actually don't really get into this idea of going to the cemetery for this anymore. Apparently, 38% of 18 to 39-year-olds said they would rather put their tributes on social media, which is kind of what they do with most things in life nowadays. But whether it's really appropriate to sort of tweet about what you had for lunch and then tweet, I don't know, an homage to your dead great aunt, I think it's possibly open for debate whether that is really the way forward. Some of them are quite tasteful. This one I think is rather sweet. For all the people we miss, Dad and my best friend, and some candles there. Others saying, well, this one's quite poetic. The true place of the dead is in the heart of the living. Nothing specific there. That's a general message for everyone. Others, well, they're paying homage to their dead pets, which is rather sweet. And interestingly, one of the animal charities here in France actually has a page in which you can leave your photographs and memories. Everyone's laughing. This is terrible.
Well, I'm going to have one of my dead duck that I turned into foie gras.
To say, the Gavet duck.
Yeah.
6.5 million people have gone to that website to actually post images.
We have an insensitive panel tonight.
Apparently so. But no, 6,500 people have already left their photographs and memories of their dead pets on this website.
Right.
So there we go. But clearly not something for everyone.
All right, not something for everyone. We can move to the realm of the future after talking about the past. And the future is the Rugby World Cup final.
Indeed it is. Early tomorrow morning, exciting battle ahead. Many people celebrating the fact that South Africa will be led out for the final by its first ever black captain. Siya Kolisi has become really a standard bearer for the Rainbow Nation. I've seen that phrase used quite a few times, and he's described as the ultimate role model. He's really rags to riches, from the townships to this is his 50th cap now for South Africa. Absolutely. Great player, great man, and not too many controversies in that, it has to be said. These images were taken this morning at his old school where excitement is clearly building because it is an amazing tale. However, the nation really is the Rainbow Nation, still in the shadow of racism, because alongside him will be a player who is accused of taking part in a racist attack back home. It happened back in August, just before the team was selected. He's still there playing, Eben Etzebeth, who's in the centre of that image there. He could face prosecution for this attack. He denies having any role in it. It involved an alleged pistol whipping and racist abuse of a group of 4 people. And it has sown division at a time when really you would have hoped the country would be able to come together, because it is a great moment for them. Total Sports, which is a South African African sports chain, have actually withdrawn all of the promotional material, all the posters, all the cardboard cutouts of Eben Etzebeth from their stores, saying that they don't want to take sides, but they feel that it's appropriate that he's removed. A lot of people reacting angrily, saying that that's simply not appropriate. Which court found him guilty, says this man.
All right, so it's a question of, whether or not those allegations are true. Emma James, I want to thank you. I want to thank our panel. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.